Franchement.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Chala, Pedig Beis, Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Yud Zayin, and we're starting on Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, all the way on top, beginning with the Gemara. We're dedicating today's class Le'ilui Nishmas, Kevan's brother, Nisan ben Avraham. May his neshama have an aliyah. Amen. Okay. So let's go like this, Chavra. I'm going to recap the first part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah began by telling us that according to all opinions, the opinions that we're going to be learning today is Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah writes, according to all opinions, produce, peiros, referring to any of the 5 grains, even if they grew anywhere chutz la'aretz. If the flour was imported into the Holy Land and it was kneaded into dough in Eretz Yisrael, the Mishnah says, everyone holds, the Mishnah's version, that dough is chayiv to have challah separated from it. What about on the other direction? What happens if you have peiros Eretz Yisrael that was exported either as grain or as flour, but it was kneaded into dough b'chutz la'aretz? Here our Mishnah writes, machloikas. Rabbi Eliezer is machayev. Amazing. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the very fact that it grew in Eretz Yisrael, that in itself will always be machayev its dough to the obligation of having challah separated from it. And Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah is very consistent. Rabbi Akiva prated. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, the only machayev of challah, the trigger, is when you complete the kneading process. We have to see where that took place. If it took place in Eretz Yisrael, chayev challah, regardless where the grain grew. If the kneading was completed b'chutz la'aretz, that is going to be exempted from challah, no matter where the tfuah grew. That is our Mishnah. Now, what we will have in the Gemara is a braisa that will make it clear that everything we said is shitas Rabbi Meir, Bishitas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. But according to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer also argue regarding imported. Our Mishnah says that when you import peiros chutz la'aretz, if you needed it be'eretz Yisrael, everyone says you're chayiv. According to Rabbi Yehuda's version, Bishitas Rabbi Eliezer, imagine that Rabbi Eliezer is consistent with, it only depends where it grew. Just like in our Mishnah, same Shita, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, Bishitas Rabbi Eliezer, that if grain grew in Eretz Yisrael, even though you exported it and you needed it into dough in LA, Rabbi Eliezer is machayev. Why? Because it grew by Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Rabbi Eliezer holds that the same is in the opposite direction. That if tfuah grew b'chutz la'aretz, even if it was kneaded into dough in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to be exempted from challah. Why? Because it grew in chutz la'aretz. According to Rabbi Akiva, there's only one machayev, the kneading. According to Rabbi Eliezer, there's one machayev where it grew. Okay. Now, we're going to have today's a very consequential daf, and I'm going to go through all the steps. We're going to learn many steps today that I'm sure will be needed for later in the Masechta. A big part of today's daf will be about what is the status of flour and dough that was found by our grandparents when we entered the Holy Land the first time under the leadership of Yeshua. The Gemara will start with the premise that since we entered, unlike Maisris that only went into effect 14 years later, the chiyuv of challah began b'vayachim when we entered. But what's pshat? It obligated the chiyuv of challah that even flours, even those that were already made. Listen, while we entered Eretz Yisrael, only upon our entry were we then chayiv to separate challah. It subjected even the doughs to the challah obligation. And the logic behind that, as we'll see in the Gemara, the question is, the machayiv is the entry. Well, if the kneading of the dough is the trigger, the kneading happened already. The Gemara is going to teach us here that when we entered the Holy Land, I think it was Yud Nisan, right? The ownership that we were given by God over the land went back retroactively to the Bris Ben Absarim. Bris Ben Absarim was 430 years before we left Egypt. So it's around 470 years back from the entry, Lemafreya. So it's as if we owned it since then. Ubemela, all of the dough was already chayiv and challah. That will be one huge topic of today. Another huge topic will be, as the Gemara will show us, that Rabbi Akiva, it's not so simple to say that the machayiv, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, is the kneading, which is true. There's another point that is extremely important halachically, and that is called kermu paneha, the point in which the dough forms a crust in the oven. So as an example, the case of Rabbi Akiva, the Zabraisa, that if you had people on a ship and they were kneading dough, guys, this grew into Chutz La'aretz, this is Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't care where it grew. They finished kneading it when the ship was in the territorial waters of Chutz La'aretz. And there's an oven in the ship. If it reached the stage of Kedemu Panel, which means that the dough formed a crust while it already entered, when it entered territorial Eretz Yisrael, territorial waterway of Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's going to be Chayiv and Chala. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's never a trigger that comes about with the crust formation. Yes, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, especially according to our Mishnah, that holds that there are two Mechayven. One of them is kneading of the dough. That's our Mishnah, according to Rabbi Meir, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. Peiros Chutz La'aretz that was kneaded in the Holy Land will be Chayiv. That's fine. So the kneading, the completion of the kneading is Machayiv, but never the Kedem Upanel. Another big topic. When we entered Eretz Yisrael under Yoshua, even Rabbi Eliezer will agree that if the formation of the crust took place after we entered, even Rabbi Eliezer in this case will hold that you'll be Chayev Chala. He'll agree with Rabbi Akiva, and we'll see why, again, the entry to Eretz Yisrael is unique. And even though the doughs were already kneaded, if it didn't yet reach the Kedmu Panel stage, we did the Kedmu Panel after our entry, probably connected to the Slama Freya, even Rabbi Eliezer will be moida that you'll be Chayev. After this discussion about Chiyuv Chala, regarding when we entered Israel, what exactly was Chayiv and Chala, we're saying almost everything. But there's going to be a big discussion about Chodesh. Chodesh also did not go into effect only after the 14 years. Chodesh also went into effect by our entry. And now the question is, what became prohibited as Chodesh? And the Gemara is going to establish that Chodesh affected unharvested grain, even the harvested grain. That means that when we entered Eretz Yisrael, all of that was there, no matter in what stage, became asur until the Karban Omer. Now that creates a huge problem, which is the Omer is brought on the 16th day of Nisan. Pesach, the mitzvah of Pesach is to eat matzah. One of the mitzvahs of Pesach is to eat matzah. We're chayiv to eat matzah on the night of the Seder. Not reshus, but chayva. How did we fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah when everything was chadash? Gewaldige kasha. In other words, when we were in the desert, let's go that chadash is only noyeg ba'aretz. Certainly before we entered the land, there was no obligation of chadash. So in the desert, we bought flour from merchants to fulfill the obligation. We didn't make matzah out of man, lochayra. But when we entered Israel, maybe we also bought it from merchants. That's going to be a kasha. The Gemara is going to give us 3 answers, and we'll see how far we can get into these answers. This is big topics. Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, l'chaim. So our Mishnah holds that according to all opinions, Bein l'Rabbi Eliezer, Bein l'Rabbi Akiva, Peiros Chutz La'aretz. Peiros means grains, any one of the 5 grains. Even though it grew in Chutz La'aretz, if it was kneaded into dough, in the Holy Land, our Mishnah writes, everyone holds it's Chayiv and Chala. And what's the source of this ruling? The Gemara says, because since Ksiv it says, and you can read this pasuk in the Torah Oir HaSholem, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'martu aleim b'vayachem el haaretz, asher ani mevi eschem shama and the limud will come from the superfluous word shama. It could have said that bivoyachem el haaretz asher ani mevi eschem. Taka, what's the shama? So that teaches us shama atem chayvin. In other words, there, meaning when you need flour into dough, there you will always be chayiv. Even, what's the chiddush? Even if the product, even if the grain, even if the flour was grown and made in chutz la'aretz, shama, you're always going to be chayiv. And in the reverse, ein atom chayavim chutz la'aretz. Okay, now, okay, says the Gemara. Tani we learned in a Braisa. Now that we have clear in our Mishnah. So again, peiros chutz la'aretz, that was kneaded into dough, which is the machayev in the Mishnah, the completion of the kneading in Israel will be chayev l'kula alma. What about grains that grew in the Holy Land and they were exported anywhere out? Exported as grain, exported as flour, that detail doesn't make a difference. It was kneaded into dough, chutz la'aretz. So here in our version, the Mishnah has a machlokes. And Rabbi Eliezer says chayiv, which means according to our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer holds there are two machayvin for challah. Aleph, where did it grow? If it grew in Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be chayiv always in challah. Number two, even if it didn't grow in Eretz Yisrael, if it was kneaded into dough in Eretz Yisrael, you will also be chayiv. Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah says, no, you're potter. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, the only mechayiv is where was it kneaded? Where did it become a dough? If it happened b'chutz la'aretz, even though it grew in the Holy Land, Rabbi Akiva says potter. Says the Gemara, Tani, we learned in a Braisa, all of what we just said is divrei Rabbi Meir, bishitas Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer. Aval divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that just like in the second case in the Mishnah, there's a machlokes. In the first case of the Mishnah, which is peiros chutz la'aretz, that was kneaded into dough in Eretz Yisrael, peiros chutz la'aretz, oichet machlokes. And it's going to be amazing that Rabbi Eliezer, Shamute, Shammai, Machmer will be in this case lenient. At least he'll be consistent. It's easy to explain him. Not his source, but his logic. Rabbi Eliezer pointed. You know, according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's one criteria. Where did the grain grow? Pashat. If it grew in chutz la'aretz, I don't care that you made it into dough in Eretz Yisrael. Pointed. Rabbi Akiva is also consistent, even though we're going to add nuance. What's machayiv? They're kneading it into dough. If it grew in chutz la'aretz, who cares? Was it kneaded into dough by Eretz Yisrael? You're chayiv. If it grew in Eretz Yisrael and you kneaded it chutz la'aretz, you're going to be potter. Where was it needed? According to Rabbi Eliezer, where did it grow? And as I said in the intro, which is important, we will see, Rabbi Akiva, there's more to that. Yes, even according to Rabbi Yehuda Shita, where it grew is not relevant, but it's not only the kneading, there is also this idea of where did the crust begin to form, as we'll see. But we're not jumping ahead. Let's stay over here. Now that we have Rabbi Yehuda, now we want to know the source. The source is Leshitas Rabbi Yehuda, Bishitas Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Akiva. So my comment that Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that is now lenient, that holds that peiros chutz la'aretz that was imported into Eretz Yisrael, kneaded into dough in Eretz Yisrael, is exempt because it says lechem ha'aretz. Torah oira shalom. V'hoya ba'acholchem olfam shlach. V'hoya ba'acholchem lechem ha'aretz. That it will be that when you eat mi lechem ha'aretz. So the Torah says torima truma l'Hashem, and this torima truma means separating challah. So lechem ha'aretz, says Rabbi Eliezer, to tell you loy lechem chutz la'aretz, meaning that if it grew b'chutz la'aretz, even if you needed it in Eretz Yisrael, it's not called lechem ha'aretz. How great is that? B'chlal lo hoyer, that when we make the bracha, this is the famous question, how do we even say hamoitzi lechem in ha'aretz? How do we even say that? When it seems to be not true, right? Boida Priya Eitz, yeah, God is, of course, God is the only creator. So God created the Priya Eitz. But God, was moitzi the lechem in haaretz? I don't know. Ask your wife if she worked hard at making the bread. You can say hamoitzi dagan min haaretz. The lechem doesn't come out of the aretz, not yet. My daughter sent me a video that they found. They found a fruit that you open up the fruit and it's mamish chocolate pudding. It's mamish what it says in the Medrash that Mashiach is going to come and then gluskois will grow off trees. It's like a Danish, a chocolate Danish. It's like unbelievable. And you don't make a mazoina, so it's gluten-free, metalo gute Zachen. But let me come back up. I just want to say that lechem, in other words, it fits. In other words, the word that Chassidus says, that just like the manna fell from the heaven, that bread, even though we did our part, we baked it, and all of the malachis that we did until the baking of it, that part of the bracha is a Jew acknowledging who did all of that. Not koichi v'oitzim yadi. You know who did that? The Eibishter did it. Even the lechem is min haaretz. But here it fits over here because here we're saying that lechem haaretz means that if the lechem doesn't mean the bread. The lechem here also means the grain. If the grain grew b'chutz la'aretz, even though it was baked ba'aretz. But lechem haaretz doesn't mean the end. It means everything. The growing. Gavaldik. So that's that. So remember, guys, lechem haaretz, l'Rabbi Yehuda, l'Rabbi Eliezer. It's not complicated, but we have to love these gemaras. You have to. It's like a puzzle. And if you don't have coffee, then you can use a board. And we have no board, so make a lachaim on your coffee and halk up, as they say in Yiddish. So that's Rabbi Eliezer, l'Rabbi Yehuda. My time of the Rabbi Akiva, which at least according to Rabbi Yehuda's version is consistent. It's only about the kneading. So far, never about where it grew. Another pasuk where it says, El haaretz asher ani mevi eschem shama. That's the pasuk that we began in today's daf. So again, shama is l'chu'ura superfluous. Of course it's not. So what's the limud? Shama atem chayavim. Meaning that when you knead it into dough, there you'll be chayiv. Bein bepeiros aretz, bein bepeiros chutz la'aretz. And the same thing in the opposite direction. And if you kneaded the flour into dough, bechutz la'aretz, even though it grew ba'aretz, no, it's not shama. Very good. Rabbi Eliezer is looking at the beginning, at the growing. Rabbi Akiva is looking at the kneading, at the end. That's going to fit with what we're going to learn soon, that there's even a later end that can also be machayev. And now, as we find sometimes in the Gemara, we have to work out what each Tana will do with the pasuk, with the word from the other. So, Ma mekayim Rabbi Eliezer, Taima the Rabbi Akiva, it says Shama. What does he do with that? So says the Gemara. And what's quite amazing, the way we will learn Pshat in the Gemara, according to the Marafulda, that we're not directly answering this question, but actually we're going to ask a new question on Rabbi Eliezer. And the way we'll learn Pshat, from the way Rabbi Eliezer will have to answer the current new question that we didn't articulate yet, that will, b'derech memela, answer the kasha that the Gemara has, Mamakaim Rabbi Eliezer, with the pasuk of Rabbi Akiva. And for the people that walked in late, doesn't matter. You can start right now. So now we're asking a new question, a typical Jewish thing. You're answering this question with a new question. Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Elazar. And obviously, my friends, this is not we're asking a kasha on Rabbi Elazar. So this Rabbi Elazar is the Amoira. So the Chavraya b'shem the Amoira Rabbi Elazar, Talmud Chavad of Rabbi Yechanan, and Rabbi Ba b'shem Rabbi Elazar, again the same Amoira, and Rabbi Hila b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. They have another, in addition to the above question, which is never the end of the world, because that's how it works. Each one has their own limit. Here they have a kash. Kach Meshiv Rabbi Akiva es Rabbi Eliezer, that they had a Masoira. In other words, they had a tradition that Rabbi Akiva actually asked Rabbi Eliezer, Ein at moideli, don't you admit to me that b'shah shenichnusu Yisrael la'aretz, this is a very big key of today's daf, that when we entered Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yeshua, and again, Maisres, remember this, was triggered after 14 years. That means until the first 14 years, there was absolutely no tevel. In contrast, the obligation of Chodesh we'll have at the end of today's daf went into effect. Chala went into effect right away. So 1 second. Now, what does it mean that you're chayiv chala? What happens if they found kemach already? Or even better, what happens if they already found doughs? Now then, if the kneading of the dough triggers the obligation, at least let's say that if they needed doughs, the goyim, before we entered, now that we entered, we walked into homes and there was already ready-made doughs. How can you say it's chayiv? You would think there's no, when the moment of the trigger happened, we're not there. So how do you know the fact that yes, we were chayiv chala, and this is where do we get that from? We don't know. More than that, the fact that Rabbi Eliezer didn't tell Rabbi Akiva, I disagree with you. This in itself means einat a moideli, and he was taka moide in this that everything was chayiv chala. Now, the lav gedulei pturhein, we're making a correlation between that which grew in Eretz Yisrael, made into dough in Eretz Yisrael, prior to it becoming holy, prior to our entry. Nevertheless, even though it was at a later point, now that we entered, everyone seems to agree that everything then was chayiv and chala, even though the dough was made out of ptur. So Rabbi Akiva asked Rabbi Eliezer, I have a kash on you, which is, why are you saying that that something that begins with a ptur will never be chayiv? This is according to Rabbi Yehuda's version. It's not about where it's needed. Dough that flour that grew b'chutz la'aretz, and they imported the flour and they made it into dough in Israel. Our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir holds, everyone holds your chayiv. According to Rabbi Yehuda that we're learning today in the Baraisa, he holds that Rabbi Eliezer holds your potter. Why? Because it grew b'ptur. It grew b'chutz la'aretz. So why? What's the difference? Says that's a gevaldik akasha. Just like you were moided that everything that was found in Israel, which is gedulei ptur, nevertheless, now that we entered, is chayiv and chala. So why would it not be the same? Now, the Gemara is saying, "V'hu mekabel b'nei" means that Rabbi Eliezer accepted the challenge. It doesn't mean that he agreed with him. It does mean that he did not tell him that your premise is wrong. And now, what's going to be amazing, this is all one way of learning the Gemara, which is so bekitzed. The bottom line is that even Rabbi Eliezer is moida that there is something that has to do not with where it grew. It has to do with, is it Shama, which is this one case that when we entered Eretz Yisrael and we found not only Kemach, but even doughs, everyone agrees that it was Chayiv and Chala. This is great. And where would Rabbi Eliezer learn that from? From the Shama. So from the question that Rabbi Akiva asked Rabbi Eliezer, he did not answer that question. Like, why don't we extend it even to that which grew b'chutz la'aretz? He didn't answer that part. But at least now we will know Mamekayim Rabbi Eliezer, Tamid Rabbi Akiva. The Shama will at least be the source, both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, regarding this B'Shah Shenichnesu Yisrael La'aretz. Beautiful. Okay. Now that let's have more words, and I'll answer that question. What's the logic behind it? If the Mechayiv is where it grew, before we entered, that's not Mechayiv. We were not there. If the Mechayiv is the kneading it into dough, let Rabbi Akiva, there's no Mechayiv. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosi, let's analyze this question. Eich Rabbi Akiva Moisev es Rabbi Eliezer. And not only that, v'hu mekabel minei. In other words, come on, I'll tell you why it's not even a challenge. And that will answer your question. Over there, meaning, emes, when we entered Eretz Yisrael, this is such a beautiful liner. Hashem, when it says in Parshas Boy, that how many years were we in Egypt? Psukim. So we know we were there Redu. But what the Torah noch writes two psukim, Nowhere is it written explicitly 210 years. It's either written we were there for 400 years, and then we were there for 430 years. So Rechita. So what does Rashi say? We were from the birth of Yitzchak until Yitzias Mitzrayim is 400 years, but from Bris Bein Absarim, Avram Avinu, according to Rashi, was 70. That's the Ein Mugdam Amucher, that Lech Lecha begins when Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha was when he was 75. That's explicit. Later in Parshas Lech Lecha, we have the record of the Bris Bein Absarim. According to us, we're going to learn Pshat that happened when Avram Avinu was 70. It means he already went to Israel then. And that is where Hashem gave him the Psura Sa'aretz, with the Tsar, Psuras Banim, Psura Sa'aretz, the Bris Bein Absarim. So the Chazal are saying that when we entered Israel, retroactively the Holy Land belonged to us. That answers your question. In other words, when we entered Eretz Yisrael, Limafreya, it was Eretz Yisrael. So it's Peira is Eretz Yisrael. That's why you're chayiv. To Amar Afuna, b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, and where do we get that from? And guys, read in Torah Oira Shalom. It says like this: By Yoimahu, that's the pasuk in Lech Lecha. Koras Hashem es Avram, right? Even before his name change. Bris Lemor, Lizaracha nosati es haaretz. I have a simple kasha. Who knows English? Lizaracha nosati. How would you say? You're making a promise of something that took 470 years, 430 plus 40 years in the desert. Future tense, it should have said, Lizaracha etein, ein ksivkan, nor vashteit, Lizaracha nosati. What does that mean? Then it wasn't ours. But when we entered, retroactive, kfar nosati, and which is great. Now, this is such a good point that we even wonder why didn't Rabbi Eliezer give that answer. But this already shows us the difference. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's one criteria, which is where did it grow? If it grew in the Holy Land, you're chayiv. Why is even Rabbi Eliezer moida that when we entered the Holy Land, everything that we found was chayiv chala? I'll tell you why. Because it grew in Eretz Yisrael. It grew on the 9th. We entered the 10th. I think we entered the 10th or the 11th. We entered the 10th. That's because it was retroactive. Masha'enkein, something that grows b'chutz la'aretz, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Eliezer, I don't care where it's needed. It's irrelevant. So that's in one direction. Now we're going in the other direction. Ma mekayim Rabbi Akiva Talmud Rabbi Eliezer. Right? What was Rabbi Eliezer's source? Lechem ha'aretz. And lechem ha'aretz, again, lechem means grain. Hamoitzi lechem min ha'aretz. Pinigla. So l'chayra, it has to grow ba'aretz. Rabbi Akiva doesn't say that. Rabbi Akiva says that Peira is chutz la'aretz. That was brought into aretz, and it was needed ba'aretz. You're chayiv. Why are you chayiv? It's not lechem that grew ba'aretz. So the Gemara answers that actually lechem ha'aretz is going in the opposite direction. And now we're introducing another trigger Rabbi Akiva. Atkan, even according to, especially according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva, there's one trigger. Where was it needed? Now there's actually a braisa that we're going to see in a moment, that it's not only where it was needed, but there was another stage. Even if it was needed completely out of Eretz Yisrael, when you put it in the oven, where did its crust form? If the crust formed ba'aretz, now the only way this is shayach is if the oven is moving. So the case is taka. You are on a ship, and as we know, not for right now, but we learned the Rambam, we learned this already in the Gemara also, from the Gemara Mamish, the territorial waterway that's lifnim and hachut, that is considered Eretz Yisrael, that if the Sfina is traveling towards the Holy Land, if the Kermu Panel happens after the ship is inside its meaning Eretz Yisrael's territorial waterway, you'll also be chayiv. And that's learned from Lechem Ha'aretz. The Sfina shenichnas al ha'aretz im Kermu Panel chaver daf Yud Zayin Omid Beis. This is beautiful. If it only crusted minachut v'lifnim, beautiful, even though it was needed on the ship outside the territorial waterways of the Holy Land, chayeves. But if which means the crust formed, it was still too far away. The bread became edible once it was in Israel. Too late. The Kermu Paneh is another. Now, where does he learn that from? It's amazing. He learns that from Lechem Ha'aretz. No, it's in the opposite direction. Lechem ha'aretz means that even if the dough is chutz la'aretz, the dough is chutz la'aretz. Lechem means lechem, but the bread meaning the dough crusted. If the lechem took form ba'aretz, Rabbi Akiva, you're going to be chayiv. So it's mamash min hakotza lakotza. Rabbi Eliezer says lechem ha'aretz means the produce has to grow in the land. If the produce grew chutz la'aretz, you're done. When we entered Israel, that grew in Eretz Yisrael l'mafreya, so it's Israel, the Holy Land. Let Rabbi Akiva, it's the kneading, but then from lechem ha'aretz we include kedem u'paneho. But now hold on a second. Now that we have such a shita of kedem u'paneho, let's see where else we might be able to apply it. I'll give you a mashal. What will be a mashal? Isas goy. So al dati de Rabbi Akiva, we have two triggers, the kneading. So if it's only the kneading, then what happens if I bought from a goy dough that was already kneaded? Then I would say I'm potter, even if it came from Israel, because the goy is not chayiv in mitzvahs. The goy already kneaded the dough. But now that you say, "Ooh, there's a kedem u'paneho trigger point," so al data de Rabbi Akiva, he's sfinta. Same logic behind the sfinta that will tell you, even though it was needed b'makayim ptur, if kedem u'paneho happened lechem ha'aretz, you're chayiv. So he isas hagoy. That's great. Or that we mentioned before that when we entered the Holy Land, not only the kemach, but even the doughs were chayiv and challah. According to this, we don't need the logic of lemafreya. We don't need that. Why not? Because even though the goyim had dough, and we entered their homes and we took it over, the kibush, but so what? But we baked the bread. Kedem u'paneho happened when a Jew owned it. Hi hachnosasam. How great is that? Okay.
Rabbi, how does that answer the question you brought up in the beginning when we say, today we say, Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz? We're not baking it in haaretz.
All I'm saying is that according to Rabbi Eliezer, it fits. Al pi niglam. It's al pi chasidus, Vlad, this is from the Rebbe Sicha. That the whole chiddush of the bracha is that just like hamoitzi man min hashamayim, that a yid has a munah that even though I taka worked and I made a day camp and I'm building sukkahs, the oibishter is giving me the hatzlacha. In other words, that's when the man fell from the heaven. It was clear, anes, that our avoid is we're chayiv to work and take pride in that. That's what Hashem wants, but to give credit to the oibishter. That's now Alpin Nigla. That's the answer here, Vlad, because according Alpin Nigla, according to Rabbi Eliezer, lechem means grain. What can I tell you? Because that's what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. It says lechem. Lechem means where did the grain grow? That means lechem doesn't mean bread. Lechem means grain. Maybe in the future we're gonna have, like I mentioned, we're gonna have the lechem will grow min haaretz, el shem haasid. We're gonna take it off to eat it. Either it's going to be delicious, or you will become like these people you find in the health stores that they eat kernels the whole time, like birds. So that's dasidus, and they tell you they're healthy, and they look
obeyed. Either way, obeyed.
Whichever way, I would prefer the bread grows on the trees, and the meaning that we're going to have the little kernel. Okay.
Azoi.
Okay.
Why Sfina have to? We're saying that because it says Sfina.
No, Rabbi Akiva spoke about Sfina. Now the Gemara is saying that now that we know Sfina, the same logic will be. No, it's now that we were machadesh that the kedem u'paneho is a trigger. So if you buy Isas Hagoy, according to Rabbi Akiva, you'll be chayiv. Okay. Now this is, guys, halkop. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer argues with all of this. All of this is learned Rabbi Akiva from lechem haaretz. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer, Vlad, learns lechem haaretz means where did the grain grow? He has no such limud. He has no, which means that Rabbi Eliezer argues with Rabbi Akiva. Let me speak about Isas Hagoy. And by the way, that's a Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't say Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah says Chachamim. But now we know that Chachamim is Rabbi Eliezer, which means most people agreed with him. That what? That if you buy dough from a goy and the Jew puts it in the oven, the Chachamim say pater min hachala. Only Rabbi Akiva says you're chayiv in chala. Clear, machloikas. Now we know why, because they are.
Doesn't this connect to the machlokes we had about, in general, produce from Eretz Yisrael that's owned by a guy, whether it's chayiv in Trumas and Maasros?
So the machlokes is, if yesh kiyan la'akum, Eretz
Right.
Yisrael hafkiya or not, I don't see a connection at all. But that's just me. Let me think. I don't see. That's a different topic. In other words, the question is, does their ownership take away so much kedusha that it's no longer Eretz Yisrael? Here we're saying when a guy owns it, there is no chiyuv, vadai. The only question is that unlike Trumas u'Maasros, by chala, the mechayiv is either the needing or kedmu paneha. If the mechayiv is kedmu paneha, so at the moment of kedmu paneha, let me tell you, Danny, what this is. Even according to the opinions that hold that ein kinyan la'akum lafkiya, but a goy is not chayiv in Maasros. And if the goy did the meruach, then if I'm not mistaken, l'kula alma, you're not chayiv to be toidem u'ma'aser. But if a Jew now does the meruach, so since the mechayiv, the meruach, was under Jewish ownership, you're chayiv. That's what's the case over here. Says
So that would be like the crust happening with the Jew.
Yes, that yeah. Now,
Okay.
moedim chachamim, guys, the way we're learning, there's a big machlokes. This chachamim is Rabbi Eliezer. It's even though explicitly there is a machlokes chachamim, which we know is Rabbi Eliezer, with Rabbi Akiva by Isas Hagoy, that a Jew buys and he puts it in the oven. Le Rabbi Akiva chayiv chala, halacha l'maisa. Le Rabbi Eliezer chachamim pater min hachala. Everyone is moedem. Going back to what we learned on Amud Aleph, this is a big thing today. B'hachnos sasan la'aretz. That what? That we entered, that's what happened. We entered the land. Some things were still connected to the ground. Some things were flour. Some things were already made into dough. All of that was chayiv and chala. No, let me go in the other direction. When we entered Eretz Yisrael and we found ready-made bread, don't forget that kashrus we had to keep from Matan Torah, but Pas Akum came many years later. So no problem. We were allowed to eat it. And there was no chiyuv and challah. That vadai. Kermu panel. Okay, that's for sure. He'll be moida. Now, how do I know that? I know that from the fact, min ma, that Rabbi Akiva masav le Rabbi Eliezer, v'hu mekabel minei. The question was, just like your moida b'hachnos sasan, why don't you say that if peiros chutz la'aretz was imported ba'aretz, L'tana Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Eliezer, why do you exempt it? He didn't answer. He didn't need to answer. He didn't answer. But the fact that he accepted the premise, like we said before, and why taka? Because lemafreya. That's the big deal. In other words, Rabbi, the bottom line is Rabbi Eliezer is rejecting kermu poneho. Isas Hagoy is exempt. If something grew b'chutz la'aretz, you bring it into Eretz Yisrael, l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, l'tana Rabbi Eliezer, you're pater. One exception, b'hachnosasan la'aretz, lemafreya. Okay, now we closed Rameir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. I love it. Chala. Now we're moving on to the next topic, which is related Chodosh. And why am I saying related? In contrast to Maasros, Chiyuv Maasros is only after the Sheva Shekavshu v'Sheva Shecholku. Chiyuv Chala Bivoyacha. The Gemara is going to make it clear that the Chiyuv of Chodosh began Bivoyacha. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yoina Ba'a Kume Rabbi Yirmiyah B'Shoah Shenichnusu Yisrael La'aretz. All of this is Askula, that Mashiach is coming. We're all going into Israel. And boy, will we need day camps then. It's going to be great. Umatsu Kamalacha. And what happened to the grain that already grew? It was moist, fresh grain. Now you can argue, okay, if we planted new grain and it grew once we were there, okay, that is Chodosh. What about the grain that already was standing? Like the dough that was already made, that we said for Chala Yerchayev. What do we say regarding that grain? Mahu shetehei asura mishum Chodosh. This is what Rabbi Yoina asked Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Rabbi Yirmiyah tells him, Lamaloi. Verstehst? They stole the name over here in Pico. Lamaloi is a Gemara. Lamalo. In other words,
what's the rationale to say that it wouldn't be?
Because since the Jew did not plant it, in other words, what's the machayev, Danny? What's the machayev of maybe? Let me use these words, Danny. Maybe the taking root is the machayev, maybe, and since it took root after we entered, so there was no machayev. And the counter to that will be, Danny, based on what we're saying, that even if the machayev is the taking root, but lemafreya, lizaracha not etain, lizaracha nosati. That means that now that we entered, it was always ours. Going back 470 years, the root took place afterwards. And by the way, no one argued with that. And furthermore, at kedoin lecha, what about grain that is not fresh from this year? What about dried grain? We're not talking about silo. We're talking about people that would leave the grain in the ground. I don't know why. So it's oizge yeveshet, it's oizge trukend. It's old. It's Amalei the same thing. What difference is it? No, that's the same thing. Afilu yevesha. And afila, it was already harvested. In other words, when Chodesh went into effect, everything that was there, harvested grain, unharvested grain, flour, harvested grain means everything is under the Isur of Chodesh Midoiraisa. So now comes the bomb question that will have three answers. We're going to get maybe one today. The question is, Zoy, this is a kasha that Rabbi Yoina has on Rabbi Yirmiyah. He's not arguing with him. So asks Rabbi Yoina, Meyato, Afil chitim ba'aliyah. It means it goes to everything. So when we entered there and we found chitim, by the way, it means chitim from matzah. But don't forget that the oimer was so'irim, but it was mater. All of the grains is Afil chitim ba'aliyah. Kachani oimer. So Bazoi, his question is lo yei achlu. Or lo achlu, or eich achlu Yisrael matzah b'leila Pesach. Love the question. Everything should be awesome mishum chadash. That is what Rabbi Yoina wondered. What Rabbi Yoina regretted is that when Rabbi Yirmiyah was still there, not that he didn't give him the question. Rabbi Yoina thought about the question, then he chapped a good answer. And he was now regretting that he didn't share the answer in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah to make sure it's a good answer, because this answer, tomorrow we're going to have easier answers. This answer will be a big chiddush. So Amar Rabbi Yoina says, this happens to all of us, that min de nafkis, when Rabbi Yirmiyah left, after he taught me the din, everything was included in Chadash. And then I had the question, how did we eat matzah? But now that he left, tehis, I regret, I regret that I didn't give the following suggestion. And it's good to give a chiddush in front of your teacher to make sure it's correct. What is? Shanya, I regret that I didn't give him the following answer, which is shemitzvas asay doichel mitzvas lois asay. That is a big statement. I'll tell you why this is a big statement. No, what's his answer would be is, you're right. Chadash is takalav. Okay, we have the rule that esa doichel lois asay. Now there's a little nuance. We have another minute, and I want to go to Daf Yud Ches. This is good. This is good. The ground zero that we had was Yevamis. I see Rabbi Newman. Welcome, Rabbi Newman. So the ground zero was, right, Esadoy Chaloisase. I just want you to know like this, that one of the sources that we have for Esadoy Chaloisase is Shatnis and Tzitzis. Shatnis is Asur Lav. Tzitzis is an Asay. When we are fulfilling the biblical obligation of wearing tzitzis, you can wear even on a biblically, not rabbinically. You can have on a linen garment, you can have, Tchelis has to be on wool. Don't forget that the Asay and the Loisa said there are written juxtaposed one with the other. Loi silba shatnis and gedilam tasalucha. So some hold that which Asay is doicha Loisa only if God put them together. The Isur of Chodesh in the Torah and the mitzvah of eating matzah are not written together. So Rabbi Yoina himself was moida that his chiddush is al data de Rabbi Yoina, which is du amar that the rule mitzvahs asay doicha loisa seh afal pi she'ein ksuva betzida in the Torah nicha. That works because according to the sheet of Rabbi Yosi holds du amar that a mitzvahs asay doicha le mitzvahs loisa seh only elam kain hoisek ksuva betzida like the Marafulda writes like tzitzis, they're written together in Parshas Kiseitze. But according to Rabbi Yoina, I have an answer. By the way, that also means that according to Rabbi Yosi, the kasha is open. That's another way of the Gemara saying, okay, according to Rabbi Yosi, that can't be the answer. But let me go, even according to Rabbi Yosi, let me tell you the chiddush of it. It's al derech we have by Big Day Kahuna, right? That you know, there's shatness. But so the question is, are they moil the second they stop doing the avodah? So there's a whole machlekes rishonim there, but it's a big problem because if you can only do it because it's a mitzvah, let me go to the night of the Seder. Today we went overboard with shiurim, without doubt. We will see when Mashiach comes, right? When we grew up, a half a matzah. Baruch Hashem, it went down to a third. Rabbi Yeoman says a quarter. It makes more sense. But let's go to the half a matzah. If I'm eating mamish not kosher, chadash, I'm only allowed to eat it. Why? Because mitzvahs asay, doichalois asay. My friends, the mitzvahs asay is to eat a kazayas, not to eat 80 matzahs. That means that the moment we fulfill the obligation, you're not allowed to eat more. How great was that Seder? No, instead, you couldn't just eat more. Eat the kazayas. No, you need a taka to know then what the kazayas is. It probably is like the size of a zayas. That would be amazing. As I state, kazayas.
This would be the same thing, right?
Huh?
If you had tzitzis that are shatnez and then it comes nighttime.
By the way, they're very good, Danish Koyach. In other words, why did the Chachamim say that you're not allowed to make a beged of linen ever for tzitzis? Even though some people today say that we don't have tchelas, which we do, but tchelas has to be on wool. So if you're wearing linen, you got to put on tzitzis with tchelas. But you're putting wool. Wool and linen is takamuter when it's a mitzvah. And now there's a machlekes rishonim. What is the meaning of ksus laila? That's where it gets complicated. So since we have in Shulchan Aruch both opinions, one opinion of ksus laila means pashat at night. If I'm wearing a beged, very good, Danny. That means the moment either shkia or tzeis, at some point you have to take it off because there's no mitzvah. And the Chachamim were afraid you won't take it off, so they said don't wear a linen garment, just wear a wool garment. No, it's tricky when you say esodoy chaloisa. So then you have to be careful. But that's a beautiful answer. So he regretted that he didn't tell it to Rabbi Yirmiyah. But again, according to Rabbi Yossi, the answer doesn't work. I think he didn't know for sure if it works regardless. And tomorrow we'll have 2 more answers to this question to be continued.